Good morning and happy Thursday, and welcome to this week's edition of Offit Kurman's Remote Rundown. I'm Jim Ries, Director of Business Development at Offit Kurman, and each week I'm joined with labor and employment attorneys Russell Berger, Sarah Sawyer, and Veronica Yu for a conversation about the latest and most relevant employment issues related to COVID-19 and advice for owners and employers on how to best deal with these issues. So since last week, seems to have been plenty of developments. Russell, why don't you kick off today's discussion?
Sure, thanks, Jim. So what we want to talk about today is some of the differences and the nuance that might apply to you depending on where you are and what type of business you have, and how law is being interpreted in different places. And we've got, at least I'd like to start with two big examples of that. The first being that a federal court judge in the Western District of Pennsylvania has struck down a number of the Pennsylvania governor's executive orders, or a number of the components of it, that he has found unconstitutional. So things like shutting down business, which is no longer an issue in Pennsylvania, but he's at least ruled, that it's unconstitutional, and Governor Wolf there can't do it again. As well as the restriction on the number of people who may attend gatherings, whether indoor or outdoor. He's found that that's a violation of the constitutional right to the freedom of assembly. And now isn't the time to get into the esoteric constitutional law debate over the accuracy of that. I would note that there was a similar case brought in Maryland in the federal court here, where the federal court in Maryland rejected the challenges to similar restrictions implemented by Governor Hogan. But it's just another reminder that depending on where you are, where you might have employees, the courts might interpret these things differently. So we've been talking for weeks now and months now about how different jurisdictions are applying different rules, how they're crafting different executive orders, how their policies are different. And now we're starting to see the added layer of courts interpreting these things differently. One other big difference that I wanted to point out is, depending on your industry, different CDC guidance might apply with respect to what you have to do when you have employees who have been exposed to COVID-19. In particular, if you meet the definition of critical infrastructure, you have a little bit more leeway in allowing workers who have been exposed or who may have been exposed to still be able to come to work. Now, there's still going to be precautions and added precautions that you as an employer are going to have to take, but if you fall into that category, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility, a few more options on how you deal with employees in those situations.
Yeah, and what we've been seeing, and as Russell's referencing, is that really between all of the different states, there has been just a lot of different developments. You've got the federal level, you've got the CDC coming out with certain guidance regarding critical infrastructure, and and then just lots of guidance on what to do, when to quarantine, all these things on this national level. And then we have each state doing its thing as far as trying to figure out how to keep workers safe and what classifies as critical infrastructure, what actions different employers need to take in different industries. And each of these states are kind of figuring it out as they go along and looking to other states and what other states are doing. Governor Hogan definitely leading the governors, meetings and things, and really interacting with a lot of different governors from other states. Have to assume that he's up on what each state is doing and looking to them for guidance, and all of the governors are looking to figure out, what other states are doing. And so we're curious, with the courts, when someone makes a decision like the Pennsylvania courts are making, how that's going to impact Maryland or other states nearby. We're also seeing that there's no shortage of developments and updates in various states as to how they're handling safety precautions and executive orders. Just September 17th, Governor Newsom from California just signed in a new law that is going to be putting additional guidance on employers, requiring certain uniform notice to employees regarding potential exposure of COVID-19 in the workplace. So there's going to be a specific protocol that employers are going to have to follow if there is any potential exposure, and they're going to have to notify employees about employees that have COVID, that employees that have been ordered to isolate, and any employees that have died from COVID, and any employees on the worksite itself that have been exposed to someone who's had COVID or has died from COVID. So it's really, there's going to be specific protocols, and we've seen this with Virginia a while ago as well, that they've got very stringent safety laws and protocols, some of the most stringent in the state. So still developing, and each state is still coming up with new ways to try to keep employees safe. So if you're in multiple states, you definitely want to be keeping an eye out on these changes, as they're still coming frequently. And then now courts are getting involved in interpreting these things. So definitely a lot ahead to see how states are going to continue to react.
Yeah, I mean, for businesses, since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been this balance between keeping the economy open, providing essential services, and at the same time keeping everyone safe from COVID. And it was kind of this balance of how do you do that while also limiting your liability. And so in the beginning of the pandemic, there was discussion that the federal government should step in and provide some sort of liability immunity for essential businesses and other businesses that had to remain open during the pandemic, especially when everything first started in March. So that legislation never came, but what we're starting to see is that states have been passing laws to provide this immunity for certain businesses against COVID-19 claims. So, for example, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming have provided immunity to healthcare providers. North Carolina has provided immunity for essential businesses such as grocery stores and restaurants. Oklahoma and Utah, I mentioned those already, they had a more broader approach. But most recently, Ohio has passed a law providing immunity to schools, healthcare providers, and businesses, so long as those businesses didn't act recklessly or with any intentional conduct to cause harm. So we see that there's these protections, starting to be put in place in different states. And so we'll have to see if Maryland or other, our other bordering states adopt some sort of legislation. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that businesses won't be sued, but it certainly provides, another layer of defense there. And so it just, I think the takeaway for today is that because there hasn't been, any, legislation passed on the federal level, the states are kind of dealing with, the pandemic, which really has no example to look to in the past to figure out how to deal with these issues, but they're coming up with, similar but different laws to kind of navigate the pandemic. So I think the takeaway is, even though you may not reside in one of these different locations, it provides an example of what we may expect and, what may come in Maryland, DC and Virginia.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, even just thinking about all these orders and rules, and our advice generally is, comply with the guidance, comply with what's out there. The court in Pennsylvania is just kind of a reminder. Judges are going to interpret it their own way, and there's bound to be some differences in how different courts interpret things. But it's not something that's going to be there is no clean path to, absent a state implementing immunity, there's no clean path to, if I do all these things, I'll be safe. I won't get sued. I won't be exposed.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to this too, as far as thinking about the different states and different jurisdictions, is that we're seeing a lot of remote work, obviously now, and now that people are kind of settling into this remote work environment and it's becoming more permanent, people really need to start looking at, well, where are my employees actually located? Have they moved? Do I suddenly now have a bunch of employees in California or somewhere that might I might be impacted by the rules there? So as things are developing, and I think in the initial phase of this, everything felt very temporary. Everyone's working remote on a very temporary basis, and now as we're looking to the future, that some of these initial band-aids are actually becoming permanent things, you really might need to be paying more attention to more jurisdictions than you thought.
Sounds good, everybody. All right, so our trivia question today is, I've been reading a lot of articles about our mental health and physical health while we're in quarantine and working from home. Lots of tips out there of how we should spend our time. And I'm wondering, how do each of you spend your time, like pausing in between Zoom meetings and phone calls and writing briefs and so forth, and lunch and dinner and breakfast and coffee? But how do you prefer to spend your pause time while working from home? And we'll start with Veronica.
So for mini breaks, I definitely like to go walk outside, just take the dog outside quickly. The weather's been beautiful, so that's been a nice way to get a little de-stressor. But I also like, if I feel like I need to take a break, I think that's important to listen to your body. And so a little mental break, I love to watch Bravo TV. Pretty much anything on Bravo is a nice escape from the law. So just listening to your body and taking breaks when needed.
Because the shows on Bravo are mindless, is that right? You don't really have to think.
So. Very much so.
Russell, how about you?
We don't allow breaks here, Jim. What are you talking about?
Your answer is predictable anyhow, but we want to hear it.
Yeah. I definitely get my sports fix, but I'm probably not the best because I end up, I'll take a 3-hour break to watch the Ravens and put everything else aside. But otherwise, I'll watch the NBA playoffs with the laptop open in the evening. So I kind of, like I said, we don't allow breaks.
Okay, Sarah, how about you?
I would say mine's mostly socializing with the neighborhood. So I live in Baltimore and Hamden, and I've got a great little situation where I've got a little yard and I've got my front porch and I've got plenty of distance to be able to have people come by and say hi. And I've got a cute dog that pulls them in, and then I start talking to them. So that's, I get, those are usually my breaks. I get to wave to a neighbor out the window and step outside for a minute and chat with them and how they're doing. And that's usually a good one for me.
So you have a dog that's a chick magnet, and I have grandchildren who are chick magnets.
Yeah,
exactly. I get it. It works. And I absolutely take breaks in between Zoom calls and phone calls. And we recently built a patio and actually in the front of our house, because that's the best access for us. And I'll just go out there for 5 or 10 minutes, and the weather's been so nice, and we have the sun hits it, and it's just great just to decompress and chill. So good stuff. Well, everybody stay healthy. Enjoy this nice weather, because we won't be talking about this forever. There'll be worse weather and different situations that come up. But enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.